Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to celebrate the resurgence of the mall. Millennials, if you're with me, I want to hear you. Shout it. Now, assuming you're not driving here, I want you to close your eyes for a minute. Now, I really mean that, like, only if you're not driving, because a little bit of a tangent here. There actually was somebody in a neighboring town just earlier this week. He closed his eyes for a moment of prayer in a very slow, creeping sort of traffic situation, and his foot kind of slipped and it accelerated a little bit more than he wanted it to, causing him to rear end the front of the car. And he actually was very honest with the cop. He says, yeah, I was actually just taking a moment to pray, and yeah, that's how this happened. So, assuming you aren't driving, I want you to take a moment and close your eyes. Take a deep breath in. Do you smell that? The specific, intoxicating, and slightly aggressive mix of Auntie Anne's pretzels, high sheen industrial floor wax, and whatever heavy-handed cologne Abercrombie and Fitch was spritzing on us that day. This is 1998 at its peak. For anyone who grew up in the 90s or the 80s, the mall wasn't just a building, it was our cultural nervous system. It was our third space, the crucial environment between home and school or work, where our social hierarchies disappeared for a moment and we established our own identities. We hung out around those neon lit fountains. We navigated the labyrinth of the food court. We actually did mall walking long before seniors made it this fitness trend. We existed in this windowless, climate controlled vacuum where time didn't exist until you walked out its doors. Amazing memories, just pure nostalgia right there. Now, if you spend any time on social media, or actually more probably here on YouTube, you've seen the dead mall aesthetic. This has been a trending thing for over like 10 years now. There's this whole subculture dedicated to people going in and basically trespassing, by the way, into empty, vacant malls to film their empty corridors and crumbling foundations with eerie synthwave music in the background. You see their panning images of stores shuttered completely, the rolled gates down, mannequins spread out on the floor, missing heads and arms and legs, like some sort of weird French Revolution massacre on mannequins. Hangers just laying on the floor, debris left behind by people that have vacated that space. This all creates a compelling image and honestly sort of like addicting viewing because it brings that nostalgia to us, but it also leads itself to create a very popular but very wrong narrative that the American mall is a relic and that it's dead. But we need to get one thing straight. The mall is not dead. It may have died in a previous form. And in general, malls are not dead. There are some that, of course, have been demolished, but in general, our malls are not dead. They're actually not even dying. If you really look at them, it's just taken them a long time to undergo a massive high stakes metamorphosis. We're watching in real time a giant shed its own skin and emerge as something entirely different with a story that will be more resilient and frankly a lot more interesting than its origin story. Speaking of that origin story, let's give you the brief version of how and why exactly malls came about. See, to understand where we're going, we've got to look at this thing called the Gruen Dream. So, the Gruen Dream is a phrase that is used to describe the actual plan of a man named Victor Gruen, the father of the American mall. Now, one thing that a lot of people are surprised to hear when they hear that Victor Gruen is the architect of the American mall, they assume certain things about him. One of them is that he's probably pro-commercialism and pro-capitalism. Guess what, guys? Surprisingly, Victor Gruen was a highly socialist architect who hated cars and the sprawling urban environments that we had here in America. His ideal was to create walkable European-style town squares, hundreds of these across the country, that would focus more on the community aspect of being around like a fountain, a statue. You picture like any sort of city or village in Italy where you have all of these outdoor seating areas. He wanted to create that, but like put it inside a building. So he wanted people to come into the mall, not for the commercialism. No, commercialism would be lightly, very lightly sprinkled in there. Sort of like a little bit of salt you put in a brownie batter. But overall, it was going to be about camaraderie, community, experiences with other people. You would come and sit at one of those tables to people observe. You would have conversations with your friends and family, long dinners. You would go there for your first date, pop into a restaurant, then sit outside by the fountain or the statue or whatever was the centerpiece of it. But the basis of it was meant to be a walkable European town square brought into a building. It was all about community. But as we do in America, if someone gives us an idea, we Americanize the crap out of it, and that's exactly what we did. We got away from that community-centric vision and we turned malls into this hyper-efficient machine for pumping mass-produced goods at us. And we bought it, and we bought it big. Generation X may have killed the radio star, but then as we enter the picture, the millennials, in a way, we killed a version of the mall. We killed the mall that we kind of have nostalgia for, but we are part of the reason why malls are actually resurging in a different form. So as we grew into adults, we began to adjust our spending habits. As we entered our late teens and early 20s, we began to look to experiences and memories more than getting that ninth pair of Nikes. We wanted to spend our money on movies and laser tag and bumper cars. Laser tag. Hell yeah, if you've ever done that, dude. Super fun. We also wanted to eat food that wasn't out of a grease fryer. We began to want experiences for our meals where we had them leisurely. It wasn't about cramming food in our face and then moving on to the next thing. We wanted to sit down with our friends or family, have a meal which stretched out over an hour, hour and a half. We created the resurgence of sit-down dining. In the 50s and 60s, sit-down dining was still very much the norm. It was everything that people were looking for. The 70s, convenience sort of started to pop up, convenience and fast. And 80s and 90s, we just went hardcore into that. But as we became adults in the 2000s, we went back to that slower pace for meals. And that is actually one of the things that has helped save the American mall. But we're not going to get there yet. We also got to understand that when we did begin to shop as adults, we didn't want to go out into crowds and battle them. We wanted different brand options than what the commercial overlords were willing to give us in their stores. We wanted our individuality expressed in ways that a chain department store wouldn't allow us to, because they couldn't. It didn't make fiscal sense for them to curate to every single possible thing or trend or style sense that a person might have. When we were shopping, the malls began to crumble. The mall of the 80s and 90s was overwhelmingly leveraged on commercial goods. The standard mall imprint or like map, if you remember, like you are here and say on the big, huge display, the standard mall was 80% stores, 15% food court, which by the way, the food court was all that sort of fast food, and 5% services. Services, yes, you may have missed them, but there were some services in the malls. That would be like the places that would give you those like massages where you put your head like through the, you sit backwards on the chair and you put your head in the hole sort of thing. Then the services of like obviously the nail boutiques that would be in there giving you the manicures and pedicures. So there was a little bit of service in the malls. But the malls were overwhelmingly leveraged towards sales. 80% of the square footage was stores. The malls began to fail when they wouldn't adapt to our new spending habits. For years, we watched the slow death march. We watched the YouTube videos of wrecking balls and dynamite with morbid curiosity. We sent trespassers into these abandoned malls like some creepy autopsy on the guts of a building. Some malls survived. They survived by adding restaurants on the exterior facing sides, allowing you to enter the food place without going into the mall. This was a great idea. What this did was this allowed people to kind of patronize the mall without having to sort of look at the bleak reality of what the mall was on the inside. We could bypass the dying atmosphere that was the mall with the empty, vacant stores. Some more regional theater chains began to build into malls where the larger theater systems has failed. Some of us had very large malls, which had, I can't even remember necessarily what that movie theater company was, but theater chains began to build their cinemas into the malls on the outside again because it made dinner and movie super convenient. But the guts of the mall remain to be a haunting memory of what used to be. Now, let's talk about the most fascinating part of this evolution because there's actually two generations that play into it. Technically, actually three, actually. So we've got millennials. We did our part by kind of like killing the capitalism, commercialism part of it by doing online shopping. But we contributed to the new skin that's emerging by engaging and sort of encouraging this longer meals and white tablecloth dining per se. But Generation Z and Generation Alpha actually play a very important role in the current trajectory of the mall. See, you wouldn't think about it, but these digital natives who have never known a world without a smartphone or Snapchat or anything, by the way, they will be the final nail in the coffin for the actual physical original layout of the mall. Because Generation Z and Generation A has data that is showing the opposite of them being very digital and them being very online. Generation Z is actually leading the charge back to a physical storefront where they can actually touch things, feel things, smell things. They can smell the current edition of Abercrombie and Fitch cologne. They are leading the charge for bringing back store and shopping as an experience where you indulge the senses. And their psychological reasons for this are deep. First, they have already exhibited screen fatigue. Lord, I know I have screen fatigue. I just can't seem to get out of it. After being saturated with digital ads and apps and everything 24/7, blue light always in their face, Generation Z and Generation A are craving tactile, sensory-rich environments. Contrary to what many of us thought, that they would just begin to live life entirely on their screen for the rest of their lives, they're actually showing signs of much sooner than the older generations of putting that aside to actually go out and look at a real tree and feel the grass under their feet. They want the hunt. Their dopamine hits don't come from scrolling through on Instagram. Their dopamine hits don't come from adding to the cart. Their dopamine hits come from feeling those bed sheets, from smelling that perfume, from tasting all those mall tastes, those pretzels and those sodas and everything that we kind of turned away from. They are turning the add to cart button into a relic for their generation. Second, there is a massive lack of third spaces for young people to exist in today, or even adults, because maybe as a kid we were kind of annoyed that mom or dad tagged along with us to the mall. But the reality of it is that the mall was just as much a social sphere for us as it was for the people carting us there in their cars. So we are craving these third spaces that exist where, again, outside of the home and outside of work, we have a place that we can all come together and we can exist regardless of our position in life. And this is with so much of why we need these malls. With so much of our lives that are mediated by screens, the mall has become a place for social currency. It's our social experiences. And this is what we're getting back into. We're not creating these just for shopping anymore. We are engaging in malls for the actual experiences. Now, millennials and Generation Z, we are still out there doing our spending sprees. We are documenting them for hauls and all that content creation. But yet, what's really interesting is that outside of those people that are doing that, they are stepping away from any sort of massive realization that they need to have commercialism. In fact, they are sort of leaning into this idea of curated commercialism is what they're calling it. And their curated commercialism involves a little bit of spending on items, But yet, so much more of their budget is being put towards experiences, and not just how we did as millennials by going laser tag or, going to restaurants. Like, they're taking all that to a much higher level. We're talking about like experiences like cooking classes, high end cooking classes. We're talking about high end experiences at spas, things like this. These are all things that they are considering their experiences that they want to spend money on. They are making malls a main character by giving them the opportunity to offer these experiences to them. Now, while they do still value instant gratification, they don't look at Amazon to be fulfilling that instant gratification. Their instant gratification comes from holding that thing physically in their hands when they want it. That's why they're going back to the mall or to Home Goods in person in a strip mall to do their shopping. The waiting for 2 days for them feels like an eternity, where they can walk into the store, they can try it on, they can see how it looks in a mirror, and they can walk out immediately. They are reclaiming the malls as a social hub, but they want it to be authentic and visually stimulating. But they also are bringing in, again, more than just the commercial side of it. They aren't looking for a sterile box. They aren't looking for something where they come in and spend their money and bring more things out of it. They're actually looking for a destination that feels like an extension of their digital world, but with the warmth of a physical one. The most successful malls today are moving beyond that ratio of 80% retail, 15% food court, and 5% services. They're becoming living destinations. We're seeing a massive trend of residential add ons and conversions. I've talked about it in a previous podcast where there are these new developments being made where they maybe are closer to what Victor Gruen imagined, where we have these like town squares that are being built, where you have the first floor is all sort of like commercial spaces where the majority of them are going to be experience based. We're going to have restaurants, we're going to have maybe laser tag or some newer form of some entertainment, as well as cinemas. And then all the upper floors are going to be residential. Those have been incredibly successful. That now is being applied to the malls where Boston stores, by the way, rest in peace and sorry for that, Boston stores are being converted into apartments that live and attach to the mall. So we're creating these hybrid things where we're seeing a massive trend of residential units being built into malls. Developers are taking those giant department stores like Boston Store and they're turning them into luxury apartments. So those anchor department stores you have on like the four sides of the mall, those are what are being turned into these sort of community living environments, whether it be apartments or condos or however you want to word it. Sometimes they're even being turned into student housing for a university located very, very close nearby. So if we think about the logic of this form from a developmental standpoint, a mall already has the infrastructure, the massive parking footprint that's needed. It has the heavy duty utilities, albeit they might be slightly out of date. And it has a proximity to major highways because these malls were not built like 10 miles off of the freeway. They were built literally like within 5 minutes off of an exit. So by adding hundreds of residential units to these properties, we are creating a captive audience for retail and dining and experiences that will remain for generations to come. It's like the ultimate live, work, play loop. Because you start out here where you live or over here where you live, you leave, maybe you work in the mall somewhere because remember, we're putting more services. We're putting banks again into malls. We're putting doctors' offices into malls. So you come down or you go over, you go to work, then you walk over after work, you have your play and your meal, then you go back up to your other eco space where you exist and you live, back in that former J.C. Penney on the end. A great example of this is the Arcade in Providence, Rhode Island. This is actually the oldest indoor mall that exists in America. And what's really interesting about it is that instead of tearing it down at any point, they were one of the first that converted the upper levels, because this was like a 2-story mall, by the way. So they converted the upper levels into their residential experience. It's a bunch of like micro lofts while keeping the ground floor for smaller boutiques, restaurants, and those sorts of things. This is a microcity model. It's about density and convenience and creating a sense of a place that doesn't require a car for every single errand. As an investor or a pro in this space, this is where our frontier is. We are moving away from this hyper specialized idea of real estate, and we're going to begin re-embracing this idea of mixed use into a much higher degree than we ever did before. So where does this leave us? If you're looking at a struggling mall and you're seeing a graveyard, this is where you need to begin to shift your imagery. The malls are not dead. The death of the mall was just necessary pruning of otherwise a great building. The properties are surviving and thriving, but they are being reimagined with a bolder vision towards diversity. They are leaning into the psychological needs of the younger generations, embracing the shift towards residential living and becoming community anchors once again, and more closely in the image that Victor Gruen wanted. We need to stop looking at retail and commercial spaces as dead weight. Whether they're small or large size, there is an opportunity in these mixed use spaces. Chances are, if you drive through your nearest downtown that has history to it, meaning it's from like the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, you are lined with these potential mixed use buildings up and down, where you have commercial on the bottom, residential on the top. That is how you can get in on this, even if you can't afford a very big loan for a large mall. Don't think that to be a part of this, you have to get a large loan and buy that abandoned mall, which is 500,000 square feet. Just drive through your nearest small town that has that infrastructure in those older buildings. That's how you can capitalize on this. You can buy one of those buildings and highly market it to renting it to somebody who's going to bring an experience into the town. Bring somebody in that might do an axe throwing business, or obviously a restaurant, or you could even possibly consider like a co-work space as we're more working from home. You could also consider something where you do like a cat cafe. Like, hello, who wouldn't want that? Oh wait, I know, my dad. That's his day of that. That's like his vision of Dante's 11th Circle of Hell, by the way, is like a cat cafe. It's coffee and cats, his two least favorite things on earth. But anyway, there are plenty of ways that we can use these spaces. We just have to get rid of our old thinking and look towards the future and what the younger generations are telling us. So guys, here's the message for today. Re-embrace the trends of what Generation Z and Generation Alpha are doing. Don't think they're going to live their entire lives on the digital screen. Understand that their trends can actually be something that can help you in your portfolio. It can actually bring you diversification. You know, we just had a podcast where we talked about, or we will, I'm not sure what the timing this is going to be, about the rising construction costs and how that's causing a rent affordability crisis. Well, this is how we can begin to diversify ourselves. We can also own these spaces that people rent from us to create experiences for other people while mixing it with our residential portfolio. So guys, I want to know, what is your favorite store from the 90s mall? Like, what was the thing that was absolutely your jam? And on the off chance that you weren't really into the shopping aspect of it, then I want you to let me know, what was your food court staple? Because even though we tend to have a lot of like smaller, like sort of ma and pa restaurants in our fast food mall courts, we still would have our national staples. So let me know in the comments, what was your favorite 90s store or your 90s food court vibe? Mine, definitely my store was always JCPenney, and I don't really know why, but that was what I loved. For the food, I mean, honestly, it can't really beat Auntie Anne's. Like, I just like the pretzel and the soda, to the point that, like, if I go to the airport or like Illinois, if I drive on the toll road, they have these like massively cool like overhangs where they have restaurants and whatnot up there. I will always stop at Auntie Anne's and I will get a pretzel and a soda and just have that like nostalgia while I'm looking at all the people driving under me. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I know we really didn't get into like tactical as far as like everyday operations, but I really am like just enthralled with this resurrection and this resurgence of the mall in its different form. And I definitely felt like we need to talk about it. And it's, of course, is applicable. We've talked about at the very end about diversifying our thoughts and diversifying our portfolio. All right, guys, until then, until next time, invest smart and live boldly.